Today, we're going to talk about a battlefield, but it's not one fought with tanks or drones. Nope. This one's fought with information, with emotion, and perception. We're diving into cognitive warfare and how to defend what is, without a doubt, the most critical asset any organization has: the human mind. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Forget servers, forget patents, forget the physical buildings. The real engine of any group, its ability to even function and survive, is its collective power to think and make decisions. And that right there is what makes the mind such a prime target.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get a handle on why the mind is such a valuable target. Then, we'll define what cognitive warfare actually is. We'll look at its number one weapon, deception, and then, finally, we'll get into how to build our defenses, both for ourselves and for our teams.
All right, let's jump into section 1, the mind as a target. Before we could even talk about defense, we have to really understand what it is we're protecting and why it's become this new frontier in security.
Think about it. Every single strategy, every innovation, every response to a crisis, where does it come from? It all comes from the coordinated thinking of your team. It's this shared mental space that lets an organization navigate, well, anything. And because that collective mind is so incredibly powerful, it's become the very thing adversaries want to disrupt.
So that brings us right to the heart of it. What exactly is this threat? What are we really talking about when we use a term like cognitive warfare?
And look, this isn't science fiction. Not at all. It's a very real, very calculated strategy. It's about using our own mental shortcuts, our own emotional responses against us. It relies on a really deep understanding of human psychology. How we pay attention, how we remember things, and maybe most importantly, how we build trust.
This really just lays it out perfectly, doesn't it? Traditional warfare is about breaking things, physical stuff. Cognitive warfare, it's about breaking cohesion, breaking clarity. It completely bypasses firewalls and physical security to go straight for the operating system running in our heads. It targets the very foundations of how we see the world. And this is where you see the ripple effect. An attacker doesn't need to convince everybody. Nope. They just need to plant one tiny seed of doubt, one distorted story, or trigger one really strong emotional reaction. In a connected team, that single cognitive breach can spread like a virus, totally derailing projects and creating chaos and division. Okay, so we get the what and the why. But how? How does an attacker actually pull this off? Well, that brings us to the practical side of things, the weapon of deception, which you probably know better as social engineering. This right here is the first key to understanding its power. An attacker doesn't have to craft some perfect, fact-checked lie. They just need to create something that's plausible, a story that fits just enough with what we already believe or fear to get a foot in the door.
And then, once that plausible seed is planted, they pour gasoline on it with emotion. The whole goal is to bypass our rational, complex thought process and just hit our internal react now button. A feeling of urgency, fear, even excitement. These things can short-circuit our logic, making us act way before we've had a chance to think it through. And the final piece is this. A lot of the time, the goal is simply to create chaos and uncertainty. If they can just muddy the waters and make everyone doubt what's real, an attacker can completely paralyze an organization's ability to make decisions. So just remember that combo. Plausible to get in, emotion to bypass logic, and uncertainty to create paralysis. And here's the part that's truly chilling. These attacks, they don't show up with flashing red lights. They arrive disguised as a helpful request from IT or an urgent email from your boss, or even a friendly message from a colleague. They exploit our natural trust by wrapping themselves in the camouflage of the familiar and the everyday.
Okay, so that's the threat. It sounds pretty intimidating, I know. But here's the good news. The mind isn't just a target. It is also our absolute best defense. So let's shift gears from the problem to the solution, and we'll start with what each of us can do as individuals. Look, this isn't about becoming paranoid, it's about becoming more deliberate. When you understand the tactics of influence, you start to spot them. When you learn to recognize your own emotional triggers, like that sudden surge of urgency or anger, you can hit the pause button, just slowing down, questioning things that feel a little too familiar or easy, and verifying requests through a totally separate channel. These simple steps create that little bit of mental space we need to move from an automatic reaction to a conscious choice. Now, Individual resilience is absolutely critical, but it's not enough on its own. To be truly protected, we have to weave these defenses into the very fabric of the organization itself. We need to build a culture of defense.
This chart just lays it out so clearly. A culture where information is hoarded and teams are divided against each other, that is fertile ground for divisive stories to take root. But a culture that's built on trust and cohesion, where communication is transparent and open, well, that basically inoculates itself against misinformation. When procedures are clear and careful thinking is valued more than frantic urgency, it becomes so much harder for an attacker to exploit manufactured chaos.
And this brings us to what might be the most empowering idea of all. The goal isn't to lock down the human mind like it's some kind of security flaw. The goal is to understand it. It's a powerful system, a predictable one, and, most importantly, a trainable one. By understanding how it works, we can strengthen it and turn what seems like our greatest vulnerability into our greatest asset. So I'll leave you with this final thought. In a world where the information environment is often specifically engineered to be confusing and overwhelming, the ability to think clearly isn't just a skill, it's a strategic advantage. And the question really is your organization actively building it?